Okay, we're live, no? We're also
I...
live on Facebook.
Wait.
Okay, we're
how
live.
Can
no?
I...
We're also live on Facebook.
Okay. Sige, got it. Wait lang.
Wait. Okay, we're live.
How can
no?
I...
We're also live on Facebook.
Okay. Sige, got it. Wait lang.
Wait. Okay, we're live.
How can
no?
I...
We're also live on Facebook.
Okay. Sige, got it. Wait lang.
Wait. Okay, we're live.
How can
no? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We'll start in a couple of minutes.
Austin, how can I have access to the questions kung wala akong mabasang question? Anyway, I can read the chat, no? But I don't see any question at the moment, no? Wait.
Cell phone. Colonel Rio, General Rio, sent me a message.
Hi, Anna.
Is he there? No more. Wala na. Yeah. Wala.
Austin, they're asking for the link to FB. Baka post it there.
It's already on my Facebook. So,
yeah.
But how can I reach him? Kaya will ask Austin.
I'll go to the other side. Is it starting?
No, not being fixed yet. About the Facebook.
You're currently muted, Austin.
I'm sharing the Facebook Live video to some of our audience via the Zoom chat.
Can I send my telephone?
Austin,
I've been wanting to get in touch.
You need to set to public your Facebook share because it's in private, so no one can see it except your friends.
Ayun lang ito nangyari.
Okay, it's public now. It's public now.
Okay, I can see it, Austin.
Okay, great. Okay, we're all set.
Okay, you have to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. Okay, so that we'll know.
Sass, are you ready?
Okay, wait lang ha. Let's see yung tatlong questions. Wait, where's the other one? Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Anna, I think you should mute yourself and those who are not using their mic.
Although it went to all panelists.
So, okay naman Ravi, for as long as you got the message.
Okay, I think we can now start our panel discussion sa napaka-importanting topic po ng ating panahon. Ito po ay ang tungkol sa ating disputes with China. And maraming salamat sa lahat na nag-attend ng panel discussion na ito. Sa mga nanonood po sa Facebook at wala po dito sa Zoom, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat dyan sa Pilipinas at magandang umaga naman po dito mula sa Netherlands. Ako po ang isa sa mga panelists na si Sass Rogando Sasot na ang nasa likod ng For the Motherland Facebook page. At i-introduce ko po ang isa sa ating mga panelists. Yan ay si Ambassador Alberto Encomienda na ang isa sa mga foremost minds, foremost experts in maritime and ocean affairs. Si Ambassador Encomienda po ay merong over a decade na legal studies about the Philippine claims in the South China Sea. He was formerly our ambassador to Greece, Malaysia, Singapore, and na-receive po niya ang kanyang advanced degrees on ocean law and policy from London and Columbia University. At dahil maingay ngayon ang UNCLOS Treaty, si Ambassador Encomienda po ay isa sa mga representatives ng Pilipinas sa negotiations ng UNCLOS Treaty noong 80s. At nakipag-negotiate siya sa iba't ibang bansa katulad ng China, US, at mga member countries ng ASEAN. At hindi lang po siya diplomat, isa rin po siyang lawyer. So, alam po niya ang batas. Lalo na ngayon, bawal lumabas. Char. Tapos, right now, he's already a retired diplomat and he is spending his time and effort in trying to educate us and perhaps transfer his decade-long knowledge about diplomacy and international law. At kaya siyang executive director ngayon ng Balik Balangay na isang inisyatibo upang i-promote ang isang comprehensive at holistic view in managing the tensions in the South China Sea conflict na ang focus ay ocean governance. So yung mga naghihingi po ng mga concrete ways, meron po, di ba? Meron tayo. So, Austin, ano ba tayo dyan?
Thank you, Sass, for that informative introduction. Just to point out, Ambassador Encomienda actually traveled both the customary law of maritime and ocean affairs, which was at that time the center was in London. That's why he got his advanced degree first in London University. And then later when UNCLOS was being negotiated around the 1970s, 1980s, it actually moved to the New York. So New York became the center of maritime and ocean affairs global discussion. And that's when Ambassador Encomienda, as a young diplomat, pursued his advanced studies again in Columbia University. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a bit. Just to give a welcoming remark, is our Integrated Development Studies Institute President, Mr. George C., who is a Wharton-educated geopolitical analyst and business community leader. who has advised the Philippine government since the Ramos administration on Philippine trade position vis-a-vis the US, Japan, and ASEAN. He will help present productive models to supplement Ambassador Encomienda's depth and breadth of diplomatic and legal expertise, no, with the aim of helping our country consider the productive and constructive directions forward amidst the important developments happening, no. Without further ado, if I may invite Mr. George C., the President of IDSI, to give the welcoming remark. Mr. George, are you there?
Yes, magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Thank you very much and we appreciate your coming today. We have a very special panel of speakers and yung presentation natin today ay gusto rin nating ipakita na sa halip ng itong maraming mga nagiging news, fake news at mga ibang mga pinapahiwatig na mga viewpoints ay a lot of it needs to be adjusted for accuracy and also for perspective kung paano magiging productive ang approach ng Pilipinas. No? For instance, itong sa kay Duterte, maraming nagsasabi na nagbabatikos at maaari nating aminin na may pagkukulang sa pag-handle na siguro ng pandemic and some issues, but on the other hand, maraming na-achieve na hindi na-achieve ng mga sunod-sunod na gobyerno natin sa Pilipinas. For instance, na nagkaroon ng for the first time free universal healthcare, no? Lahat ng tao to a certain amount has free healthcare. Nagkaroon ng free tuition sa lahat ng nag-aaral. We had the highest tax collections, the largest number of infrastructure projects that raised business around the country and also the investments, no? At marami pa ring ibang mga bagay at itong tinatanong nilang mga nangyayari sa China at yun ano ang natulong sa atin. For instance, isa Estados Unidos ay they actually blocked the arms shipments when the start of the ISIS crisis at dahil tinulong tayo ng China at ng Russia sa arms at later on sumali rin naman sa US. In fairness, we were able to settle in 8 months what took other countries 10-20 years hindi pa natatapos. Napakalaking bagay yan, no? So itong mga taxes natin making us more attractive also to other countries, and there's also the question of whether there were benefits from the independent foreign policy. We can say, for instance, that isang malaking tulong ay itong sa Marawi at hindi lang yan. Nagkaroon tayo ng $120 million na na-forgiven na debt, may $100 million na bridges, may about $7 billion waiting approval na steel plant, aside from other investments, and several $billion na mga infrastructure na tinutulungan tayo dyan. Aside from, napaka-importante ay mga vaccines na na-block ng US at ng Western countries dahil sa inuuna nila sarili supply para sa ibang countries. Nabigyan tayo so far ng 2.5 billion, no? 2.5 million doses, 1 million of which was donated, which means that about 1.2 million Filipinos vaccinated. Given our average 1.7% mortality, we're talking about more than 30,000 Filipinos who would have died who would die who are now not going to die, no? Aside from the continuing help that is going to be given us, aside from investments and business, no? So ang gusto lang natin masabi ay hindi tayo dapat pumanig sa China o sa US, kundi kung anong maganda para sa Pilipino at sa kabuuan ng mundo, no? At ito ay sa itong viewpoint na ito na mamaya ay we will be able to explain, and given your open mind, and we are very happy to have you here spend time this afternoon. We do have Ambassador Encomienda, who is a true diplomat with 40 years, and hindi lang as a diplomat, because he actually had on the ground experience dealing with the Vietnamese and the Chinese in joint projects and various other activities that kakaiba. At siya rin ay isa sa mga original na nag-negotiate ng UNCLOS at nakakaalam at one of the first to study the real issues on these maritime issues, no? In Columbia University. Of course, dito si Sass, siya naman ang kilala nating lahat na pinakamagaling na siya rin ang nakakaintindi na itong lahat ng mga batas na ito ay matutulong niya ipaliwanag sa atin kung ano itong mga what are the different perspectives and legalities involved. And so we thank everybody for joining us, and thank you and enjoy the afternoon.
Maraming salamat, George, sa iyong maigsi pero malaman na paliwanag. Ngayon naman ay gusto ko lang po ibigay sa sabihin sa inyo ang mga issues na aming tatalakayin sa panel discussion na ito. I would like to remind every one of you na this is not going to be the last. This is definitely the first, but definitely not the last of these panel discussions kasi nga napaka-complex ng usaping ito. So kaya ngayon, kasi ganyan po ang international relations issue. Iba't iba pong perspective at ating kailangan. Ang foreign policy po ay hindi po ito hindi po ito napakadaling isipin at hindi po ito pwedeng pag-isipan lamang sa iisang angle kasi nga complex ang relasyon ng mga bansa. Hindi lang po ito legal relationship, kundi meron din po tayong historical, meron din psychological dimension ang relasyon ng mga bansa, may sociological, may economic katulad ng mga na touch ni George kanina at iba't iba pang mga layers. Kaya dito sa una naming panel discussion, una nating tatalakayin is I think ito yung magandang pag-introduce sa presentation ni Ambassador Encomiendo. Dahil sa inyong karanasan bilang diplomat and of course as someone knowledgeable international law, ano ang kahalagahan ng diplomasya sa pag-resolve ng ating dispute with China at paano natin ito may compare sa ibang approach, diba? Katulad ng legalistic, ng military solution. And at kaakibat ng tanong na yan ng Ambassador Encomiendo is, sa tingin niyo po ba, sapat ang ating paggamit ng tinatawag na soft power or ang power to persuade as opposed to power to coerce para magkaroon tayo ng amicable solution at para makahanap tayo ng middle ground with China. So I'm gonna give you now the mic, Ambassador Encomiendo.
Maraming salamat, Professor Sass. Okay, I might swing from English to Tagalog. I'm from Cebu, so I'm not very versed completely on our national language. On your question as to a possible starting, what should be the starting point in settling the issues with China, it has to be diplomacy. That is how international relations is conducted, okay? And if there are disputes, even in customary international law, and now under the Charter of the United Nations and the UNCLOS, the first step is always negotiations. Now, when it was said that I was involved on the ground in these issues, yes, I was there, but I must, okay, just for the sake of shall we say, accuracy, I was a member of the Philippine delegation to the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS 3, but I was not involved in the negotiations. I was secretary to the delegation, but I did learn a lot. I was pushing papers and these things, and that is what also where I got involved in further studies in international law, as law of the sea, as Austin mentioned earlier. I sought to be enrolled at the University of London in 1971 simply because that was in fact also the first time that a higher studies on the law of the sea was ever offered from any university in the world. And besides, England having ruled the seas before is key to establishing customary international law of the sea. But processing the UNCLOS, which had 3 stages, it was done first. Well, the Harvard School of Law started with a restatement. It was their own work of how they interpreted customary international law. This was a next step to this is the International Law Commission before the General Assembly actually began pushing for the conference itself. Now, the conference itself, which is about further development of international law, is in fact mandated in the Charter of the United Nations. It is called progressive development. So UNCLOS 1 was about customary international law. It was not too difficult to assemble. There was quite easy convergence of views in customary international law. After all, it was not all that extensive at the time, which was then being considered. But in regard to progressive development of international law, that was more difficult because the entire, shall we say, membership of the United Nations, plus a few other countries who are not members of the United Nations, like Switzerland, were there. And now, why is it important? Why is UNCLOS important to us? Number one, we are a maritime nation and a coastal state and an archipelagic state. Now, in these 3 descriptions, we have a big stake as a state, as an archipelagic state in the law of the sea. Why? First, it is in UNCLOS that we were able to secure our status as an archipelagic state. It is a different regime from all other categories of states. And the Philippines was the one who pushed for the adoption of the archipelagic state under UNCLOS. And we were the first ones there. We were backstopped strongly by Indonesia and a few others. But in the end, there are now about 16 or 17 archipelagic states in the world. This is a separate category of statehood. Obviously, archipelagic state means being a coastal state also. Now, again, why is this important to us? You look at the Philippines in the regional map of Asia Pacific, and the Philippines, straddle the north to south, practically enclosing the South China Sea. That's one thing. It's very strategic position. Number 2, it is also very strategic in regard to protection of the marine environment and its resources. Don't forget that the Coral Triangle is practically 70% in the Philippines, okay? And of course, we have the Tubataha Reef that is farther to the west. Very strategic also in regard to resources, marine resources and the environment. Now, beyond
Pwede ba ako mag-interject sandali?
Please, anytime.
Albert.
Please.
Yeah. Ito lang, lilinawin ko lang po dun sa mga nanonood kasi medyo nag-technical tayo ng kaunti. Kung ano rin importansya ng to be recognized as our archipelagic state. Kasi di ba ang ating bansa, hindi naman po tuloy, bilang archipelago, tayo ay dinidivide ang mga islands ng katubigan. Di ba? Ngayon, yung pag-recognize ng archipelago ng Pilipinas bilang archipelagic state, ang relevance po niyan is the archipelago will be considered as one, right? Yung waters niyan will be considered internal waters, which in effect ay mag-consider siya na territorial waters. Di ba tama naman yan, Ambassador Encomiendo?
I would like to refine that approach.
Okay.
It has the sense, but it has to be refined. But Sass, please interject anytime, because we have known each other for some time, and I value your being associated with you because you are our great communicator. Okay, so please interject anytime. Don't worry about that. Now let me refine that concept of the archipelago. Yes. Uh, the archipelago is especially the archipelagic state, because not all archipelagos are archipelagic states. Japan is an archipelago, the United Kingdom is an archipelago, but they are not archipelagic states. The regime of the archipelagic state is in UNCLOS at part 4, but you have to subscribe to being one before you become officially an archipelagic state. So digressing a bit, we have always been an archipelago. We have been called since the turn of the last century as the Philippine Islands, but the regime itself of the archipelagic state is very different, especially in terms of protecting our national interests as a coastal state and maritime state, very different from that of an ordinary island state. In UNCLOS, there is also the so-called regime of islands, part 5, I think. Now, an archipelago which has not declared itself an archipelagic state under UNCLOS part 4 will be governed by the so-called regime of islands, which means that each island or each marine geological feature will have its own entitlements, normal entitlements in terms of the territorial sea, or now we have the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf. What does this mean? And I want to go into this because that is exactly the core national interest of the Philippines. If that, we must give credit to Senator Tolentino having pushed it in the General Assembly of the United States, of the United Nations, and in the UNCLOS itself. He conceptualized and defined it. And that is now what is the regime of the archipelagic state under UNCLOS Part 4. Now, let me go back to what I was saying. An archipelago like Japan and the UK, who does not declare itself an archipelagic state, the maritime jurisdictions will be determined by the regime of islands. Now, if we did not declare ourselves an archipelagic state, or especially if we did not work for that status of an archipelagic state under UNCLOS, each and every island in the Philippines will generate its own territorial sea, and especially in the original reckoning before UNCLOS 3, in which at the time UNCLOS 1, the accepted territorial width of the territorial sea is only 3 nautical miles, following customary international law, then the Philippines will have so many pockets of high seas. What will that mean? That means the Philippines will be like a sieve where ships of other nations have the right to freely transit because it is high seas within an archipelagic state. So the concept of archipelagic state, as especially conceptualized and pushed by Senator Tolentino, and that is where and implemented unilaterally before UNCLOS through Republic Act 3046 and 5446, which defined our base points and baselines way back in the early 60s. Again,
Okay, sir. Sir, so ang nakikita natin dito is part ng core interest natin dapat is to assert and continue affirming na ang Pilipinas ay isang archipelagic state.
yes.
Kasi this means na this would have actually an implication in our to our identity as a nation, di ba? If the Philippines as an archipelagic state means na all the islands are actually united and there is no high sea dividing all these little islands. Kasi nga sabi nga ni Ambassador Encomienda, kung regime of island lang ang Pilipinas, ibig sabihin, bawat islands, halimbawa, Cebu, Bohol, di ba? Mindoro, Palawan. So yung waters na nasa pagitan ng mga isla na yan ay merong diyaang pockets na tatawaging high seas na kung saan ang mga foreign vessels ay malayang maglayag pero subject to ano yan, di ba? Innocent passage, di ba? Subject to innocent passage pa rin ba ang high seas or hindi na?
No.
Okay,
They can
so yun yung
freely-
danger. So yun yung danger. So hindi na siya subject to innocent passage. Ngayon, kung if you're going to consider na tayo archipelagic state, then foreign vessels transiting or maglalayag sa mga katubigan sa mga pagitan ng ating mga isla ng Philippine Archipelago will be subject to innocent passage. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng innocent passage, Ambassador Encomiendo?
Well, Sass, you know the meaning. Maybe you can explain it. But at any rate, innocent passage means a passage which cannot cause any detriment to the coastal state. That's about it, really, the short definition. Now, perhaps you can explain it better.
Pero halimbawa, sabihin na kasi kung commercial ano naman kasi passage, parang ano naman yan wala na siyang issue kasi nga 'di ba it has always been the traditional order diyan sa ating region na free trade and freedom of commercial navigation. Ngayon, ano naman po ang implikasyon ng innocent passage sa military vessels? Do you want to
Okay.
answer?
In the first place, again, let me make the fine distinction that in that setting, there is no innocent passage, but freedom of navigation. That means they can go in and out from one part of the high seas to another part of the high seas without getting consent and without being disturbed at all. Now, if you could imagine, even without the 12-mile nautical, territorial sea now, for a regime of islands, you could imagine how it is for us attending to security issues, especially that we are so very strategically located, and that is why we are object of strategic competition from many states for a long time now, even in the 18th century. You know?
Okay, ngayon ang Ambassador Encomienda, so na-define na natin yung core interest natin, di ba, na we should, the Philippines as an archipelagic state must be part of our core interest kasi nga ito yung may security issue. Ngayon, yung mga waters kasi sa archipelagic state, nasa loob kasi noong baseline natin, di ba? We already
Yes.
defined our baseline, and then we actually keep on asserting that archipelagic waters are internal waters. Sa mga hindi po nakakaalam, meron po tayong maritime dispute with the United States regarding our status as an archipelagic state. The United States doesn't agree, consider it excessive, na yung archipelagic waters are internal waters. So we do have a maritime dispute with them, and they also assert their claim using military. Yun yung
Yes.
freedom of navigations operations. Ngayon
Yes.
lalabas ngayon tayo sa katubigan sa loob ng ating archipelago. Doon naman tayo from the baseline outwards, di ba? So meron tayong 12 nautical miles territorial sea na wala naman sigurong magsasabi na hindi natin teritoryo ang 12 nautical miles territorial sea from the baseline. Pero from there on, di ba, meron tinatawag na bago ngayong konsepto. Kasi this is very new concept, itong exclusive economic zone. This is only solidified during last century, actually from the middle of the last century, and then of course na-enforce ito when UNCLOS became operational in mid-90s, diba? 1994 if I'm not mistaken.
1994.
1994. So ano naman po ngayon to, Ambassador Encomienda, ito ngayong exclusive economic zone ng Pilipinas na pinagmumulan ngayon ng ating dispute with China And of course, na ginagamit din of course ng ibang politiko in order to drum up I would say a very dangerous kind of nationalism. Ang tanong ko sa inyo, Ambassador Encomienda, should we have the same kind of foreign policy approach or any approach na kung paano natin i-approach yung ating internal waters, like archipelagic waters? Should we have the same approach sa exclusive economic zone, or can we have a different approach?
We can only have one approach, and that is what is allowed under the UNCLOS. Now, but there are still disputes. For example, within the baselines, sometimes the baselines are called internal baselines to differentiate yung dagat na seaward kung tawagin at saka yung dagat sa loob ng archipelago. Now, sa loob ng archipelago, there are, you mentioned internal waters, yes, but inside the archipelago, inside the baselines are actually archipelagic seas, you know. But within those archipelagic seas, like the mouths of rivers, there are internal waters. That's a bit difficult to appreciate. Maybe I'm just explaining what is in UNCLOS. So you have an archipelagic state, you have baselines to give unity to the geographic unity to the state, but within those baselines, you are archipelagic seas. But within those archipelagic seas, like mouths of rivers, you have internal waters. Now, let me go back to that because if you the question that you posed just now speaks on right away of about China, but in fact, in the matter of our waters as an archipelagic state, we have disputes with the United States. Why? You see, our territory, maritime territories still are defined under the Constitution, which copies the Treaty of Paris. Okay, and in the Treaty of Paris, all the waters within the rectangular Treaty of Paris lines are in fact internal waters. That was because before the UNCLOS concept of archipelagic state came into the picture, only in 1994. But the question is, yes, it is in our Constitution. Now, how did it come to be in our Constitution? That Constitution was drafted by the Philippine Commonwealth, but it was approved by the President of the United States and adopting the Treaty of Paris lines. Who were the parties to the Treaty of Paris? It was the Philippines, it was Spain and the United States. Now, fast forward to where we are now. The United States is questioning the Treaty of Paris lines because they said that it is just too generous. Okay. Now, Senator Tolentino pointed out, that it was you who drew that with Spain, and the United States tries to modify its definition by saying it only means that the reference to the Philippine Islands then are all maritime geological features or islands within those Treaty of Paris lines. The point I've been trying to make is even if that were so, the interpretation of the United States then that the waters within those lines are not internal waters, it was merely meant to indicate the islands within those geographic parameters. It is still too generous. More than that, this is, I just want to complete this part, Sass. More than that, they adjusted the Treaty of Paris lines. So how can it be the Philippines really just took it as as territorial seas. Now the United States is questioning that, and more than because it is still in our constitution, and we can, we cannot. It's not easy to amend the constitution, but still they cannot even give us some leeway. They are enforcing freedom of navigation against the Philippines on that issue. And believe it or not, enforcing the freedom of navigation, the most challenged, according to the United States, is the Philippines is second only to Iran in the Straits of Hormuz as the most challenged by the United States freedom of navigation operations.
Sandali, bago ko to ibigay kay Austin kasi gustong maitanong si Austin kay Ambassador Encomienda. I-summarize ko lang yung sinabi ni Ambassador Encomienda about dito sa archipelagic state and relationship sa Treaty of Paris. So sa mga hindi po nakakaalam, ng history ng Pilipinas, ang Pilipinas po, kaya the Pilipinas that we know now is actually a product of the 1898 Paris of Treaty na ninegotiate ng Pilipinas, ng United States at Spain. Wala doon ang Pilipinas kasi hindi pumayag si McKinley na presidente ng United States na makasama ang Pilipinas. So doon sa treaty po na yon, merong line na ginawa ang United States, nagbigay sila ng coordinates sa Spain, and according to their negotiations, nagulat ang Spain kasi hindi naman ganun yung pagkakaalam nila sa mga nasakop nila sa Pilipinas. But of course, na-approve ang Treaty of Paris at doon natin pinagbasihan ang geographical coordinates ng Pilipinas na napunta ngayon sa ating constitution. Ngayon, as Ambassador Encomienda said, we are asserting ngayon yung right natin according to the Treaty of Paris na nakalagay na ngayon sa ating constitution. Pero dahil United States found it excessive, meron tayong dispute ngayon sa kanila. Pero yung dispute actually natin with the United States is actually brought by the treaty that they negotiated with Spain. So yun lang yung larger, to simplify the historical context nung sinabi ni Alberto and its implication. So Austin, ano yung gusto mo itanong kay...
Sass, hello, Sass.
Yes.
Sass, just a footnote. The Treaty of Paris, original, the United States paid Spain $20 million. After supposedly defeating Spain in war, it paid instead of paying the Philippines reparations, it paid Spain $20 million. Then the Treaty of Paris was amended in the Treaty of Washington, the lines, and the United States paid another $100 million for that.
To Spain. Okay, so Austin. Well, Austin, ano yung gusto mo itanong kay Ambassador Encomienda?
All right, jumping from the past technical legal side to current hot, maybe controversial topic, no? For any of our expert, Ambassador Encomienda, Mr. George, how do you see the recent Julian Felipe reef in all of this, or how should we see it in a sound and reasonable viewpoint, no? This is coming from the media friends who asked the question. China seems to be testing the Philippines' resolve by seeing what it can get away with. Is this incompatible with the narrative that we should look at China as a reliable partner in the area? Are there examples of recent cooperations in maritime cooperation with China that you can also share? Thank you. I think the Julian Felipe reef regarding the EEZ claims of the Philippines, no, and supposedly, reportedly, there are Vietnam installations there also and Chinese installations.
I think George can answer it first, and then Ambassador Encomienda.
Sure.
A lot of these are misrepresented in public. So for one, we're not siding with anybody, but the facts are that this area has been occupied by Vietnam for reefs since the 1970s and by China since 1988. So the projection currently that it is a new aggression or expansion of claim or so on is totally nonsensical. But it's useful for certain people for their public relations purposes to show that we need the U.S. VFA or U.S. backing to help here. Because even as, yes, there were added boats there at that time, they alleged 220, probably more or less, it's not necessarily wrong. But even our own Coast Guard and military has said that by March 31, they had come down to less than 50 already. So that's more than 80% off. And then they said later on in the Esquire magazine and various US magazines, which were then quoted around the world and then which were quoted in the Philippines, that the coming of the US Navy battleships had driven out the Chinese. No, when actually they arrived at April 9th, by which time there are only a few dozen left. And this few dozen is not because they were scared of, or maybe they were scared of, it doesn't really matter, but they're not going to necessarily give up that area because it's like the whole Spratly area and so on. The biggest occupant has been historically the Vietnamese, who are occupying 48 islands, far more than either China, Malaysia, or the Philippines. So we're not saying right or wrong, but to say that it's a new thing, it's not a new thing. To say that we needed the US Navy to come and take them off maybe is more to justify the expenses of the United States Defense Department than it really does anything. And also for political purposes. And we can say that here, a lot of history is forgotten. For instance, that the first to build an airstrip there is the Philippines. And this whole area, there's a whole history behind that. I will not belabor that point. Simply that the Julian Felipe Reef incident was really blown totally out of proportion and is a very misrepresented situation.
Ako, Ambassador Encomiendo, before you answer, I think I would like to go back to my original question. See, in managing tensions like this versus using hard power, like for example, getting the United States to intervene and using its military might.
If I can to just finish the second part of the question, I'm sorry, I forgot to the asking whether we should be able to trust China and continuing to deal, because there's no mistrust that happened here. Upon our request, the boats were substantially reduced, and in fact, almost practically all, except for the disputes themselves, China has met all the agreements and all the commitments that they have given to us, including anything from investments to donations and the help in the pandemic. The pledges that didn't come in are our own decisions, because what they're offering us financing that is substantially below the World Bank or the IMF rates. So it's up to us if we want investments or not. So this portrayal of a debt trap is really our own decision. If we think this, we cannot keep blaming everybody for everything. If people are giving us debt, people are forgetting that in the debt trap in the 80s, our huge debt that we couldn't pay was all to the Western institutions from the World Bank, IMF. 11 industrial projects of the Philippines all failed. The interest rates went up to 45% in the Jobo bills. That is all with the work of the World Bank, IMF, and the US banks. So the question is not whether we should trust the US or China or what. We should be smart and take each deal on itself, because even the US is not really forcing us now. They're trying to influence us. They're not trying to force us or the other countries. So we have to act smart, and we have to act collectively, not selfishly for the country. Thank you.
So going back to my question, Ambassador Encomienda, baka nakalimutan ninyo na. So what is the importance of using diplomacy in addressing, issues like this na katulad ng nangyari sa Whitson Reef, and compare it siguro na rin sa using hard power approaches, like for example, asking your military ally to to meddle in the issue.
So in the first place, I would like to go back. I would like to digress to a comment by Mr. Joe Mark Angwe about innocent passage happening in archipelagic seas. Yes, it is. but it is more technically known as archipelagic sea lanes passage. That is a technical term. Now, if a country, if an archipelagic state designates archipelagic sea lanes, then archipelagic sea lanes passage can be exercised within those sea lanes, but subject to many conditions. On the other hand, an archipelagic state need not designate archipelagic sea lanes, and that is the direction we were taking when I was still in active service. Let us not designate archipelagic sea lanes, simply because, number one, as also Mr. Angui points out, you can actually shift from exercising archipelagic sea lanes passage within archipelagic sea lanes. You can get out of it anyway in the exercise of innocent passage. But of course, innocent passage and archipelagic sea lanes passage are different regimes. More absolute is the archipelagic sea lanes passage. Innocent passage, yes, it's free passage, but subject to the safety of the coastal state, you know. Now, if I may further explain why we thought that I think this is important.
I think ano na lang po natin later on yung
yes.
archipelagic sea lanes.
No, I want to finish with that, Sass,
Okay, sige.
simply because it is topical. Right now in the Senate, there is a bill designating archipelagic sea lanes. So I thought I'd rather finish the explanation there. But when I was still in active service, we were not in favor of archipelagic, designating archipelagic sea lanes, because in the first place, especially looking at the Senate bill, it is only in the central part of the country where you can designate archipelagic sea lanes.
Okay.
Number two, again, as I said, you can shift from archipelagic sea lanes passage or innocent passage. But what is more important to us, being where we are with the Tubataha Reef, with the Coral Triangle, is to allow all vessels to exercise archipelagic sea lanes passage using traditional entry and exit points from one part of the ICs to another, but for as long as in this they observe rules like pilotage that is being done in the reef in Australia, and yes, we observe certain regulations for the protection of the marine environment. Now, okay, can you resume the question where we should be touching on the Julian Felipe Reef?
So Julian Felipe Reef ko po kasi in the dominant discourse is kailangan nating maging hardliner, right? And katulad dyan is yung kailangan nating, you know, we should involve the United States. I think maraming ganyan na nagsasabi. Now, ang tanong ko po is, gaano kaimportante ang diplomasya sa pag-address ng ganitong mga issue? And I think we should compare this to the usefulness of using hard power options, like katulad nung, you know, involving a powerful military state in helping us.
I would say that that specific question applies to the whole of the South China Sea issues affecting the Philippines, not just Julian Felipe. And I would venture right now, going ahead of the story, we must use diplomacy. But for me, I want to take care first about the other aspect of that question, where you said, should we approach a military ally for help in this regard? I want to address that first, just to disabuse our minds that in the Mutual Defense Treaty, anytime we call on the United States for help, they will come. In the first place, as a general proposition, that's true. Secondly, the Mutual Defense Treaty is activated only if there is an armed attack. So if there is no armed attack, even if China masses, probably about 1,000 of these fishing vessels there, which we can gratuitously categorized as a maritime militia. You know, you can throw in all sorts of descriptions there. If there is no armed attack, you cannot, not even if we feel that there is a imminent threat of an armed attack, we cannot invoke directly the Mutual Defense Treaty. But okay, let's put our security eggs in one basket of the United States, and that is the Mutual Defense Treaty. Okay, if we want to say, give it a play already in the Julian Felipe Reef, I would expect that we would have at least some, in the United States practice for national security, they have defense condition 1, defense condition 2, different alert levels, okay? Now, I think if that is our inclination, let us define where is the alert level for us. And then perhaps we can consult with the United States whether we can invoke their assistance in this regard. Because right now, all we hear from the United States, from Blinken, is that they support our stand on the Julian Felipe Reef. It does not talk about coming to the defense of the Philippines in that statement. So that to me is a problem. The second aspect that is giving me difficulties here, but let me go to your question about the applying diplomacy. As I said earlier, international relations is always about diplomacy. Okay. Now, there can be disputes, as in fact, the South China Sea is not the only maritime dispute in the world, for heaven's sake. So we first employ diplomacy, and diplomacy starts with negotiations. We never negotiated with China. Maybe we say, well, China never invited us to negotiate, but then that is where the power equation comes in. We should be the one to approach China, at least asking them, perhaps even politely, or, you know, what is this all about? Start the negotiations, but we never did. We went straight to the Hague PCA on a unilateral compulsory arbitration, which to me is oxymoronic. At any rate, Ambassador Bensurto later said that, in fact, before we went to the Hague PCA, we had more than 200 negotiations with China. Well, during my time there, I never witnessed any negotiations. Number two, if we talk about negotiations, we should ask also our two lady ambassadors, one after the other, our ambassadors to China, Ambassador Brady and Ambassador Basilio. Now, whether there were indeed negotiations. Finally, if there were such negotiations, can we be more transparent about it? Normally, there would be progress reports about negotiations, if not the actual transcript. We never had that before we filed the APCA arbitration.
Ambassador Encomienda, sabi niyo, can we be more transparent about it kung may negotiation? Actually, kung inyo pong pupuntahan ang arbitration website ng Permanent Court of Arbitration, nandoon lahat ng records kasi the Philippines submitted evidences kung meron niyang negotiations. And bilang isang international relations scholar, yung mga sinabmit doon ng Pilipinas is do not qualify as negotiations kasi ang mga evidence kasi nila doon is note verbal. Nag-usap, right? Pero the whether it fulfilled negotiation, mababa kasi yung threshold ng arbitration court about what negotiation is. So magkaiba doon sa what would count as a legal threshold on whether there is a negotiation at doon sa empirical fact na kung meron talagang negotiation na gawa na finding common grounds, etc. This is open, out in the open. So meron ng transparency, and I think every Filipino can just visit the Permanent Court of Arbitration website and look at not just the decision itself, and look at the arguments presented by both sides about whether or not there was indeed a negotiation. You can easily judge this for yourself. You don't need if you're just going to have an open mind. And I think this is something as well for former Albert Del Rosario to answer whether there was indeed a negotiation that happened. Kasi ang nakita lang natin na negotiation is yung backdoor negotiation ni Trillanes.
Well, can I come into that, Sass, because you examined the documents.
Yes.
And you
yes.
came to the conclusion that that was not proper negotiation.
No.
I'm talking and making my statement from the point of view of one who was there.
Okay. Yes.
I headed the Maritime Ocean Affairs Center up to the end when Ben Surto took over, and I can assure you there were no negotiations.
Okay. So ako, I examined the documents and I concluded that there were no negotiation. And Ambassador Encomienda was there at the DFA when all these things were happening, and he could attest that there were no negotiations. So I think that's a strong point to make, especially that Ambassador Encomienda was the head of the Ocean and Maritime Affairs at the DFA. Tama po ba
Can I give a little input?
Yes,
No,
George.
during that period in time, I'm not an ambassador or official representative of the Philippine government when it comes to diplomacy. I had some experience in representing the government teams in negotiations. This during that period of a president who I will not mention, there were several, I believe probably some Philippine officials, maybe they made some efforts. But the same on the Chinese officials, they did come to us and we did try to patch them up. In fact, we tried to patch even at the highest levels of the presidency, I will not mention who, 3 times, and he refused to have meetings, absolutely refused. And not only that, when at one point he had asked us to try to intervene to help a certain situation, when we started and we had already succeeded, Ambassador Del Rosario, I have to say, came out and went to the media the next day and attacked and told everybody to go on a rally in the streets and they would be patriots if they did. And at that time, then the Chinese called off the concessions and the negotiation. There was an absolute attempt to black out any discussions at that time. Even though at that time, even prior to that administration, 3 ambassadors had already said they were offering the Philippines 60% of the yield of the income of Malampaya without us having to put any risk capital. Whereas if we look at the Malampaya, we are on the net. And a certain way of analyzing the document will say that we had 60%, but in effect, we had less than 10% of the income go to the government. It all went to private parties. So this is just a little input from the private side.
So I think magandang point to.
May I inject also? Yeah, in relation to your question for Ambassador Encomienda, these are from some of our media friends. Some experts and analysts say that the White Sun Reef is a Scarborough Shoal standoff brewing. What's your comment on that, Ambassador?
I think I made a comment already on that earlier. That okay, for myself, I don't even want to look at that issue simply because to me it is a non-issue. Number one, our narrative on what is characterizing the Whitsun Reef is a further take in argumentation in regard to the decision of the Hague PCA. So the Hague PCA itself did not touch upon Whitsun Reef. We were projecting the decisions in the Hague PCA to apply it to the Whitsun Reef. That's one. Number two, I would like to mention the comment of a recent comment of Justice Carpio that Mackinnon Reef, Whitsun Reef, which is an extension of Mackinnon Reef, according to him, have different regimes. One is sovereignty, the other is sovereign rights. Quite frankly, I did not give that too much look. Why? Because that precisely goes to the issue, the big issue in regard to the South China Sea disputes. We are claiming our rights only as sovereign rights. Okay, and well, let's extend that simply because we cannot go to a shall we say the ITLOS or to the in practical terms to the ICJ if we discuss sovereignty. So we chose sovereign rights. Fine. But on the part of China,
And Vietnam.
no, let's start just with China. The position of China is the 9-dash line has been there since time immemorial as sovereign, on sovereignty basis. That means ownership. In short, if you look in simple argumentation terms, the issues are not joined. So how can you argue against China saying that we have sovereign rights in this so-called West Philippine Sea, which I do not buy, as against the China saying, well, your West Philippine Sea is within our sovereign jurisdictions. The two issues do not meet. So there cannot be negotiations. I mean, actual negotiations there in the first place, but at least a show of an attempt at negotiations would have been good, you know. So on that basis, I'm a bit disturbed because I wanted to go back to one point about the sovereignty, sovereign rights. Well, anyway, I dropped. I forgot it. Yes.
I think I would let you breathe first, Alberto Encomiendo. I think it's very important for us to study the history of the Scarborough Shoal. And if we're going to compare the Scarborough Shoal to the Whitsun Reef, ang layo. And sabi nga nila, di ba, if we don't learn the lesson from history, we are condemned to repeat it. Ano ba ang nangyari sa Scarborough Shoal? Let's be clear about it. Ang nangyari sa Scarborough Shoal, di ba, nagkaroon ng standoff ang Philippines and China. So what did the Philippines do? Diba? And this is all according to Albert Del Rosario. The United States approached and wanted to broker a deal between China and the Philippines. And what did Albert Del Rosario tell us? He told us na ang sabi ng United States daw sa kanya, merong deal na parehong aalis ng Scarborough Shoal ang China and the Philippines. And of course, relying on what that US official, si Kurt Campbell, hindi natin alam kung totoo, nag-withdraw ang Philippine Navy, di ba, sa Scarborough Shoal. And of course, the China saw it as an opportunity to actually now effectively occupy Scarborough Shoal. Ngayon, sa usaping ito ng triad ng China, US at Philippines, only Albert Del Rosario claims na merong ganung deal. The United States didn't back Albert Del Rosario's pronouncements na merong deal. So ano yung lesson natin dito sa Scarborough Shoal na dapat nating matutunan? Ang dapat nating matutunan dito is we should directly negotiate with China. Kasi when we include another power, that's when trouble starts. I think it would have been a different ending sa Scarborough Shoal if we didn't include the United States. They were not reliable there. Kasi nga hindi naman nila, can you imagine your foreign affairs secretary saying na merong deal? And then the United States didn't confirm that there was a deal. The United States didn't even guarantee kung anong mangyayari if the deal would be violated by any party. So there was already a lot of errors in that regard, and that error, I believe, was avoided in the Whitsun Reef, diba? Na nagkaroon ng negotiation. The military, I believe, Chinese and Philippine military officials had a talk, and this was quite managed well. And tama si George C. na yung report ng Esquire na dahil nandun ang United States kaya umalis ang Chinese. That's not what happened. What happened was the triumph of diplomacy, proper diplomacy na ginawa ng Pilipinas dito at hindi yung involvement ng United States. I think we shouldn't give credit United States for how the Philippines manage the Whitsun Reef. We should be more proud of how well our diplomats and other officials handle this issue. So yun lang.
Can
Austin,
I
meron pa ba tayo
bring up
ibang
a
tanong dyan?
possibility here?
Yes, George.
Yes, a possibility, because this is a very, very often quoted narrative by Carpio and these gentlemen, or if they're gentlemen, that China reneged on the deal. As you said, there never was any details of the deal. Somehow, Ambassador Del Rosario saw it fit to allow the Americans to negotiate on their own, exactly as General Aguinaldo did, over a century ago. I think the lessons were never learned. No, apart from that, there never being any backup or any testimonial that a deal was actually reached. There is the testimony also that people tend to poo-poo, but maybe has some possibility of being true, that why would they drop from over 120 boats to 3 and then renege? Because they had dropped down to 3, and under negotiation in the testimony of Trillanes, he said that at that point in time, they were discussing how the process will be, and Del Rosario had given the direct orders without Pinoy, admitted by Pinoy, that the boat should leave. And when the boat, not only that the boats left, and later on, the Chinese said they could still negotiate something, but there should be no filing of an international case. But Del Rosario went ahead and filed the international case, and then the Chinese decided to stay. And I would say the reason the Chinese decided to stay, then the Philippines tried to go back and ask for the Chinese, but then the case had already been filed, when they wanted to negotiate again. I say this because my experience, it's parallel to my experience. I was asked by this president to talk to certain people to lighten, to untie this thing about the tourism and the banana exports. And they were saying already that at that time, if this person, this colonel or what, planning to go plant the flag at the Spratis was not going to proceed, they will consider doing that. And that guy, president, did finally, in the evening, the president said he was not going to ask this guy he cannot ask this guy not to do whatever act he wants. But by morning, they were able to convince him to withhold that action first. And then the Chinese, from the embassy had told me, it is informally that they're considering it. But by the next day, knowing that this instruction was given, Ambassador Del Rosario went out and countered his president and asked people to go out and rally against China in public.
So ayun na nga.
Nawala.
So ano siya? So kung sasabihin na paulit-ulit ng mga tao, especially ng mga media na that doesn't want the Philippines to talk with China, na sabihin nila na Whitsun Reef would be like Scarborough Shoal. Definitely, Whitsun Reef would be like the Scarborough Shoal if we are going to let the United States negotiate for us with China. So I think here we did it directly, and we see now what happened. Na nag-de-escalate ang tension. And according to the reports, di ba, umaalis na yung mga fishing vessels doon ng China. And I think ito yung sinasabi nila nag-fail, the administration. I think we have seen they must have learned something from what happened to Scarborough Shoal, and it has been avoided here. Austin, do we have any more questions?
Excuse me, Sass. Can I have my take on that Scarborough Shoal?
Please, go ahead.
In relation to Whitsun Reef. Scarborough Shoal, I got the best account about what happened there, in fact, from Senator Trillanes himself, who said that he went to China on a back-channeling mission in regard to the withdrawal of ships. Then all of a sudden, while he has been successful on that part of the negotiations about the withdrawal of the asymmetrical forces there, one was Navy, which is ours, the other one is Coast Guard. The order came from Secretary Del Rosario to just withdraw. And so I think that is the most consistent and coherent and clear explanation coming from Senator Trillanes as to what happened, because he was there as a special envoy on a back channeling issue. He knows the facts, he knows what he did. Now, going to the Whitson, well, incidentally, I'd like to mention something about Scarborough Shoal, which you know, we keep saying that that was ours, maybe it was ours, but the United States was in fact present there. Again, I was already in the DFA when Scarborough Shoal was being used. I mean, you see, there is a narrative that the Philippines found markers in the Scarborough Shoal, and originally they presumed it was Chinese. They finally found out it was Americans. Why? Because the Americans look at Scarborough Shoal, supposedly very delicate marine geological feature and everything, fisheries and everything, and they were using it as target practice for their naval vessels. You know, okay, that's just an aside. But going back to the Whitson Reef, I was saying precisely that. As Secretary, Justice Carpio said, it is connected to McKinnon Reef, but what is involved are two different regimes. So that's precisely why I thought it bolsters my point about no meeting of minds about what to do with you know, to solve that, to negotiate on that basis. And again, another comment. I'm not sure whether there were negotiations. Yes, some quarters said that there was diplomacy, but if I may say so, the rhetoric never cooled down. So for me, there was no diplomacy. You remember in one of our discussions, Sass, I mentioned that diplomacy is defined traditionally since the days of the European nation states, that diplomacy is the means the conduct of application of intelligence and tact in the conduct of relations between states. Well, there is no use of force that happened in Whitson Reef, but definitely there is no diplomacy either in the kind of rhetoric that was exchanged, okay? But my final point there is, if you thread the narrative in Whitson Reef, what is our narrative? Well, there are 230 Chinese fishing vessels. They are very big size. They cannot be ordinary fishing vessels. They are in fact purposely designed to be a maritime militia, and they were side by side in military formation. Now, I'm not a military strategist, but in the discussions of law of the sea issues in which some military experts are present, that is the best way to destroy your fleet. Mass them together, so it is an easy target. You know, they are sitting ducks. So anyway, that is what we claim. It is in a military formation. There was no negotiations. What China did was simply disband the whole thing. So there is no military formation anymore because it was disbanded. I don't know. For me, that was, if I please use the word, stupidity.
Yeah. So I think
Can I insert some points
yes.
that were raised? Number one, the Chinese did not deny that they had boats tied together. Number two, it was shown in the satellite photos that there was a weather disturbance in that area. And then they said, why do the Chinese tie the boats together there? And then we can see pictures of Vietnamese, Philippine, other boats. It's common during a storm, they will tie them together for greater stability while the storm is being ridden out. So we're saying that, you know, these assertions, you know, they might be observable, but the reasons for them were speculative, no?
So yung nakita natin dito, i-summarize ko lang viewpoint before I hand over the mic to Austin for further questions, is the way we framed, di ba? The way the media and other politicians framed or interpreted yung hile-hilerang Chinese votes, they interpreted it as an act of aggression. When in fact, if you're gonna ask military strategists, that is the best way for your votes to be destroyed. Na tabi-tabi sila at magkakahilera. So that it is a battle formation and therefore could be perceived as an act of aggression is actually is a misperception. And sa mga nakikinig po, in international relations, misperception is a recipe for tragedy and disaster. So kaya tama na before kasing mainit ang ulo, step back muna and analyze, 'di ba? Ngayon kung ayaw mo mag-step back at mag-analyze, maybe you are following a propaganda line. And maybe you are just following orders from somebody else in order to interpret something in a particular way. So Austin, ikaw muna ang magtanong dahil kailangan ko munang gumamit ng toilet. Ambassador Encomiendo, ipasa ko muna kay Austin yung mic.
Ambassador, this is for you. We have a lot of educators also in the audience, no, all the way from Baguio to Davao and Zamboanga, and many of them have students who are looking at the diplomatic career. Can you share actual examples of your negotiations with our ASEAN partners and with China, in particularly on maritime scientific cooperation? I believe this one person had read your accounts, no, on this joint ocean marine research expedition with Vietnam and China. Can you share what was the objective of that? What happened, and maybe some words to inspire our students to take up the diplomatic career. Thank you.
But I would like to just mention as an aside from the previous discussion before Sass left, that something that really intrigued me, if we talk about transparency and negotiations and this thing, on April 2, the Chinese embassy in Manila issued a, shall we say, a press release or press statement or what, showing that Secretary Locsin was in, what province was that in China?
Fujian.
Okay, meeting with his counterpart. But I do not see any report in Manila newspapers about why he was there and what was discussed. But this is, of course, fresh in the, quite in the wake of the fishing vessel incident. I don't know. I'm just throwing that thing into the picture because it's something I think was never discussed. Why he was there,
Yes. On samples, models of cooperation with with Vietnam and China.
I will mention, of course, what you mentioned as joint cooperation, joint development. This is under UNCLOS Part 9, which makes it an obligation for countries bordering an enclosed or semi-enclosed sea, of which the South China Sea is one. It is, okay, the word used in the UNCLOS is may, but in fact, on scientific terms, it is a compelled cooperation. Simply because, look what's happening now on, say, fisheries in the South China Sea. They say China has been overexploiting the fisheries resources there. But the thing is, Taiwan is also there with a very big fishing effort. Vietnam is there, and in fact, Vietnamese fishing vessels were discovered inside our archipelagic seas in the southern Philippines, in Tawi-Tawi, I believe, and also in the north. Thailand has another big fishing effort, and so it cannot be China only doing that thing to the detriment of the South China Sea. So it is a scientific direction that states bordering an enclosed or semi-enclosed sea should, but of course, we take that as a compulsion, cooperate with each other in the exercise of rights and performance of duties, etc. The three listed are the critical definition on what can happen there, you know. And it can be anything at all relating to ocean governance, that this must be done in a cooperative way. But I mentioned that in the case of Vietnam and the Philippines, simply because joint cooperation and joint development under UNCLOS Part 9 can be bilateral. And that is what happened with us, with Vietnam. It was no, and I always give credit to President Ramos for this, because when the Philippines recognized Vietnam, after the government of Vietnam, after reunification, the two presidents, Philippines and Vietnam, decided on a confidence building mechanism. And confidence building is necessary there. Don't forget that we sent an engineering battalion to South Vietnam, of course, in support of South Vietnam and the United States. So confidence building was necessary. And the two presidents decided it will be in marine scientific research. Now, at the start of it, it was not known to be a complete program, but it was scientist driven. It was the scientists who planned and executed it. The Philippine government and the Vietnamese government were there only for logistical and policy support. Okay, so so it went off, and the first three, we call it scientific expeditions, were successful, and the Philippines and Vietnam decided to elevate it from, instead of a one-off or limited activity, to a joint cooperation activity under UNCLOS Part 9. Well, we completed with 5 cruises, 4 expeditions, and thank you. And after 4 expeditions, the scientists of both, and there is a published proceedings on these 4 expeditions between Vietnam and the Philippines, but the scientists of both countries decided that just going back and forth Vietnam and Philippines, they have enough data, to get upon which to base further cooperation. So the scientists told the governments they want either to go up north or go down south. Their preference was to go up north, which means China. And the Philippines, our chief scientist there then was Secretary Angel Alcala, former, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, awarded with a national award, National Scientist Award. His personal choice was to go north. Why? Because he said, and of course,
he's the president of Silliman University at the moment.
Yes.
So,
And
Spaghetti audience.
and because Secretary Alcala said, as a marine scientist, I didn't understand exactly how the science of it works, but he said that he knows there are upwellings and downwellings in an area near Hainan, which he wants to see investigated, because the presence of upwellings and downwellings means there is abundant fisheries resources there, especially breeding, fish. And so it fell to me to approach China about it. And I did. And there was no problem.
Maybe ask, what was the year, just for context?
Okay, this must be around 1976. Or
1976.
Yeah.
1996. 1996.
Sorry, 1996.
Okay.
1997. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So I approached the Chinese government, of course, with clearance from the Philippine government, and there was no problem. They were very eager to join the JOMSRE. And in fact, in that first visit, they already outlined some plans for themselves. I think they must have been watching Jomsre, and I convey this to our side, Vietnam and Philippines, and there was an immediate agreement that preparations must immediately start for phase 2 of Jomsre. Now, there is,
expedition.
yes,
Yes.
phase 2 of the expedition, of the Jomsre expedition, trilateral this time. That includes China. Phase 1 was bilateral with Vietnam, and immediately China agreed, and we had to plan rather quickly, simply because the windows for research is limited every year. In the early part, around April, when these are the so-called transitions in the Habagat and the Amihan, that is when you can do research in the South China Sea. Otherwise, the South China Sea is rough. And this is probably why there were Chinese fishing vessels laid up there. Whether there's storm or not, it's rough. You cannot undertake.
So you're referring to the White Soon Reef incident of the past several weeks, because it's around April season now, right?
Yes, but you cannot determine actually in advance which specific dates
Right.
the monsoon transition happens. So but normally in the early part of the year there is a three week window, and in around November there is more or less 10 days window for the other transition. So we don't have the luxury of time to prepare, right? So at any rate, this was the work of scientists. So the preparatory part went very smoothly. The Philippines offered to host it first. And in that first meeting in the Philippines, the scientists already completed 90% of the preparations.
Wow.
And I mean, they had the experience and everything, to which China was already part, if I may say so. And then in our planning, the next meeting would have been in Vietnam, not in Nha Trang. They have an oceanographic institute there, but the Chinese objected. China said no. There must be a second preparatory meeting hosted by China. And we had to agree, because that is in fact diplomatic protocol. No matter how hurriedly we have to be, you have to observe that diplomatic protocol. So China hosted, I was still there, the second meeting in Guangzhou, and they came. They even showed us the scientific research vessel that was already prepared, which is 3 times longer than our own. Anyway, then let's go to the conclusion. Actually, in China, all the preparations were completed 100%. But again, following diplomatic protocol, we have to have one in Nha Trang. So some issues was in Vietnam. So some issues were reserved, although as issues, although there was an agreement now already. At that point in time, I was removed from my post in the DFA.
Around what year na po ito?
This would be about 1968. Sorry, I keep
2000.
I keep going back to my early years. 2008. 2008.
Thank you, Tina. Just to introduce everyone, Tina is the daughter of Ambassador Encomiendo, who helps him with almost everything, including memory bank.
Yes, in fact, she sent me a note that
Thank you.
going back to the Treaty of Washington and Treaty of Paris, I said $10 million for in the Treaty of Washington, whereas it's really actually $100,000. But compare that to the Treaty of Paris, which was only $10,000. Anyway,
Sir, as Sasot said,
$20,000.
sorry, yes.
Yes.
Sorry, you can say the last point.
Well, the last point was following diplomatic protocol, a third preparatory meeting had to happen in Nha Trang in Vietnam. And of course, we had to send delegation there. And I was already I was already removed from my post. And our representative there, I don't have to mention names, began questioning the the cruise track, as we call it, the expedition track that was decided upon already in Manila and confirmed in Guangzhou for the second meeting. In the third meeting, that would not have been an issue. But the Philippines raised that point, questioning the cruise track simply because, according to the representative then, I won't mention the name, it used too closely to our exclusive economic zone. But what's the problem? And when we did the first phase, we were entering the economic zones of both countries because that is technically high seas anyway. And more than that, with the mission of the UNCLOS Part 9, we were even ready to include territorial seas, not only, I mean, it is interconnected anyway, isn't it? But anyway, just to be aware of possible sensitivities, the cruise track stopped at the territorial seas, but covered exclusive economic zones. After all, it is overlapping almost. So if you don't include the exclusive economic zones, then there is no research. Okay, then, well, that was it. That third meeting, although China immediately offered to host the third meeting, could not happen simply because the window of opportunity for research has already passed. End of story.
Sir, thank you. For those who want to know more of the details, all of this are in Ambassador Encomienda's NGO website, www.balikbalangay.com. No? That's balikbalangay.com. We'll also put this in the comment section later. You can also read the more technical details of his 40 years of diplomatic service for the Philippines, for our country, in the academia.edu, no, that Tina has helpfully uploaded also for Ambassador Encomienda. Ambassador, next time maybe we have to have Tina on the speakership.
Anyway, I know that Sass has given you the floor,
Yes.
but I'm sorry, I have to ask for a bit more time.
Of course. Go ahead.
Talking about how things will go from here, from where we are,
right,
in settling the South China Sea issues. I wrote an article some years back where I proposed still using UNCLOS Part 9 for cooperation. I mean, when you have that cooperation, you have to have a structure, isn't it? And I proposed the Arctic, there is that
Arctic Council. Arctic
Council. Yes, I proposed that as a model. Now, I want to mention this now because always the question is, would China agree to cooperation? Would China agree to this? Well, firstly, in the Jomsre, China readily agreed. Okay. Now, in the Arctic Council, China is a player there, not as among the participating states, but it is very much involved as they call themselves a
observer.
Well, it is an observer, but more than that, you see, I have to cite this because in UNCLOS, even extra-regional states can participate as other interested states, but with the approval of the regional states. In the Arctic Circle, China cannot be a regional state because it does not border the Arctic Circle, but it calls itself as a near state to the Arctic Circle. But even that, Pompeo, at that time, would dispute it. He insists that in the Arctic Circle, either you are a regional state or you are not, and they want to exclude China. The point is, the United States Pompeo even cited that you know, China is about 600 miles from the Arctic Circle. How could it be you know, a near state? But the problem is, even in the code of conduct in the South China Sea, the United States insists on being there when it is 3 times farther from you know, from the South China Sea. Anyway, I want to mention the Arctic Circle again because it is in fact a more complex situation than the South China Sea in all aspects, in terms of resources, in terms of how delicate the marine environment is, and in terms of the parties involved. But more than that, there is some equality of influence and power there. All the members of the yes. Now, I want to mention that now that probably as a future path, because that was asked by you, Sass, I would like to mention it now before we run out of time. Thank you.
Ayun lang, sa mga ano lang, just to give a more a bit of information about the Arctic Council. Yan kasi ang paper ko na sa Foreign Policy and Diplomacy about adopting the Arctic Council model. Yung mga bansa kasi dyan, meron silang territorial disputes. Diba? Hindi lang territorial disputes, meron din sila dyang fisheries disputes dyan sa Arctic Sea. Mga bansa dyan, ang magkakaaway dyan, Canada, US, Russia, Finland, Sweden, or every country na nandoon na may nagbo-border ng Arctic Sea. Ngayon, ang ginawa po nila dyan is shelve po nila ang kanilang sovereignty issue. Ibig po sabihin ng pag-shelve, wag mo muna nating intindihin ang ating sovereignty issue, mag-pursue tayo ng mga areas na pwede tayong mag-cooperate. Ngayon, ang area na nag-cooperate sila dyan is the preservation of the marine environment. Environmental issue yung Arctic Council ang kanilang target.
If I may, Sass, if I may interject, yes, because again, this is a matter of personal experience. I was assigned to Canada when this issue of the transit passage, Northwest Passage, began coming about. You are correct. I want to support you there. Just for context, you know,
yes.
At that time, it was an environmental issue and also, in fact, safety of navigation because there was ice all over. But now it is a very, very big issue, and I have to bring this up because it is bound to start moving fast. Why? Because of climate change.
Yes.
It melted so much ice that transit is very, very much easier and safer. And so I go back to you.
So ganun yung ginawa muna nila. So anong kahalagahan nitong ganitong strategy? Kasi sa conflict management po kasi na hindi naiintindihan nila ng kabila, sa conflict management, kung meron kayong conflict, ang uunahin nyo munang i-resolve at mag-pursue ng areas of cooperation is yung issue na least yung conflict ninyo. Diba? Tapos, magbibuild kayo ng confidence, magbibuild kayo ng community of trust and cooperation, and then you move forward from there. Katulad nung sinabi ni Ambassador Encomiendo, nagkaroon na noon ng cooperation with China and even Vietnam about marine research. Ngayon, kung sabi nga ni Ambassador Encomiendo, diplomacy is the use of intelligence and tact. So ang nagkulang sa atin is intelligence. Anong kulang dun sa intelligence natin? We were not able to utilize our former cooperative arrangement with China as our stepping stone for us to create an environment na pwede tayong mag-negotiate on more difficult issues. Kasi ganun yan eh. You build traction. In diplomacy, it's all about building momentum, building traction. Pero anong ginawa natin with the support of mainstream Philippine media? We proceeded to demonize the party we needed whose cooperation we needed. We proceeded to use the force of the most powerful military on earth. So ngayon, mahalagang mag-reflect ang bawat Pilipino kung
is this path that the other party is proposing is a path that would create an environment conducive to cooperation or conducive to conflict. I think matatalino namang tao kayo, di ba? Na alam nyo na kung saan patungo itong path na gustong gawin ng kabila. Is it for cooperation or conflict? So, Austin, and any more questions?
Yes, thank you, Sass. Actually, it's surprising, no? We really have a great audience, very informative and insightful questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer, but we hope you appreciate. We try to cluster them together as many as we can, no? Right now, Sass, Ambassador, Encomienda, Mr. George C., we still have 430 plus watchers from all over the Philippines and all over the world, no? And we also have several hundred more watchers on Facebook. Unfortunately, we will have to, because our speakers, our experts will have follow-up meetings for their evening, no? But I think we can have maybe one or two more questions. Ambassador, Mr.
Or three.
George, or three, yeah. And Sass, of course, you're 7 hours earlier, no? How would you rate or how would you assess President Duterte's foreign policy compared vis-a-vis President Aquino's foreign policy, no? Ambassador, please take the floor first.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I really cannot speak much about foreign policy under President Aquino because it was dictated by certain personalities who, at any rate, starting with President Duterte, I think it was a good step that he declared the implementing the constitutional mandate that we have to have an independent foreign policy. That is a motherhood statement, and that is in the Constitution. But the problem it has become an issue because we look at certain events as not pursuing an independent foreign policy. Well, it's not that. At least the intention is there. But when you go out to the practical world of international relations, where, as Sass said, a lot of factors come in, your decisions can sometimes be colored. And this happens in all countries, but especially in smaller countries. They are vulnerable to the influences and pressures from bigger countries. So
I may inject just quickly one line for our educators. How would you define Philippine independent foreign policy?
I was going into that. I don't define Philippine for independent foreign policy simply because I believe we don't have one. And I was with the Department of Foreign Affairs for 40 years. Okay, we are spouting a lot of things from from time to time, right and left. But let me continue. That even if you declare an independent foreign policy, when it goes out for implementation, it is subject to a lot of influences that sometimes is interpreted as violating the constitutional mandate. But let me go back to the point of independent foreign policy. It is, I really don't think this need to be explained very well. Before you can have a foreign policy, but presumably, of course, independent for any state, you must define your core interests. Have we done that? No. You can check the Constitution, and there are snippets there that could help define our core interests. But we have to translate that into foreign policy. In the first place, it has always been said, and this is really the essence of foreign policy, it is an extension of domestic policy. So first thing to do is define your core interests, translate, that will be, of course, filtered through domestic policy, and then you have a foreign policy. Now, as I said, even if you have that well defined, when you go out to the international world, you cannot be certain that it will be accomplished 100% faithfully. You cannot. That is what. Now, Let me go to another facet of this whole thing. Where we are as a small power, we have to rely on diplomacy, not too much on alliances, especially. Alliances may be, after all, alliances can take place even if war has already started. Okay, but to enshrine that in a rock solid, as the United States would describe it, ironclad and rock solid alliance, that cannot be. Okay, now I think we should, I have always advocated this, we should be students of Singapore when it comes to foreign policy. Singapore has a book called Little Red, it calls itself the Little Red Dot, and it openly says they have to strengthen their diplomatic core and diplomatic skills because that is where security for small nations reside, not really in military power. I don't say military power is not important, but military power is a tool of diplomacy. You first go into diplomacy negotiations, but if it cannot be helped, you use force.
Your definition, Ambassador, reminds me of a Philippine ambassador also of Chito Santa Romana, who said diplomacy is war without the bloodshed.
Yeah.
It is the battle of the minds. Mr. George, your assessment of President Duterte vis-a-vis President Aquino's foreign policy. 2 minutes, please.
Well, the biggest advantage given by President Duterte is, number one, we didn't get into war. No? That is the biggest. And second, currently, we have seen also that Marawi, we could have turned into an ISIS battleground, but we accomplished cleaning it out in 8 months, which other countries for 20, 30 years, they've been unable to get out of it. And currently also now in the battle against the virus, we're having at least 2.5 million doses of vaccine already. Some people criticize it, but in the end, as we said, 2.5 million doses is 1.2 million people protected, of who we're talking about statistically some 30,000 people saved from dying. And of course, but we'd like to say that a lot of things that I don't think that Duterte and Pinoy and the others have a different conception of Philippines should keep what it owns, but the method is different because the dimensionality is beyond just military or legal. If we look at it, for instance, if Kennedy and Khrushchev had gone into battle in 1962 and we had the nuclear war, but a few decades later, the Soviet Union just collapsed. It never had to happen, right? Or that Vietnam fighting with the US so viciously that they destroyed the country, destroyed the genetics for the next 3 generations through the chemical warfare. But currently, Vietnam has is a very close ally of is an ally of the US, but is an even bigger beneficiary of investments from China. So there are a lot of things that change over time. Taiwan did not fight Japan, and industrialized under Japan. They just rode over the period of domination. On the other hand, we have to be smart because the Philippines, I'm not saying that
Sir, I mean, just for context, we're talking about World War II.
Now we'll talk about World War. If we talk about World War II, the Philippines fought to protect what interests, we're not sure, because we had 1 million casualties. The closest casualty in the rest of Southeast Asia is about 70,000 people. Now, why is that? We fought so hard to protect the territory and the land and the US. We can't really say the territory because what can there's the Japanese forces were so powerful, even the Americans decided to leave without a big fight. So it did not make a difference in us being conquered, and it didn't make a difference when the Americans came back. So this is the best time. This independent foreign policy got us more investments than we ever did, got us more taxes than we ever did, got us more infrastructure than we ever did. And the opportunity is there because China is going to grow 50% bigger in the next 8 years. And the ASEAN will grow to be either the first or second highest growth area. So we have the first and second highest growth areas right beside us. we have to be smart and not spend all our time on Facebook and Netflix and politics. If we do, then we can see the same way that other countries have survived even the worst situation. Even China itself, trying to fight the 8 Western powers, got crushed time and time again. But when they decided to wait 99 years and just keep on working to strengthen themselves, they were able to take Hong Kong back. And so the Philippines also, and a lot of countries, if we keep on working and prioritize, we will go through the reefs and shoals of politics.
Can I add something, Austin, about
Of course,
independent foreign policy?
please, yes, of course.
For me, the characteristic of an independent foreign policy have two layers. One is a general framework, right? What defines an independent foreign policy? We can only say that our foreign policy is independent on on the first layer if it is based on our core Filipino values, if it is based on our own history, if it is based and informed by our own culture, and if it is based on our own assessment of strategic context. On the second layer naman ng independent foreign policy, kasi you cannot have a blanket foreign policy to every country. So, para magkaroon ka ng independent foreign policy in your relation in any country, then you must examine your bilateral history with that country. Diba? Ano ba yung history ng inyong interaction all throughout your own history?
Right.
Diba? So for example, sa history natin with China, we have to take into consideration the bilateral history of China and our people since time na nagsimula ang ating relationship sa kanila. And only that we can craft an informed policy based on our values, history, and culture, and not based on the interests of other countries. And that for me are the hallmarks of an independent foreign policy. Na it is grounded on our own experience in relating to another country and not based and dictated by the interest and experience of another country. Yun lang.
Thank you very much. We've reached 6 o'clock and we have about 400 plus more in the audience. We'll take 2 or 3 more questions. Ambassador, this is more online with your diplomatic personal experience. There are a lot of questions on our position on Sabah. They read your bio that you were ambassador to Malaysia. Can you share? Of course, this is not going to be the last. This is the first. So we're going to have a special session just on our Southeast Asian and neighbor issues. No, can you share us a bit of our position on Sabah?
Thank you. Yes, the important point I want to share about Philippines and in regard to Sabah is that, yes, we have an issue with Malaysia in regard to Sabah. And compared to the South China Sea issues, it is shall we say, heavier stuff, because Sabah is a sovereignty issue, whereas the so-called South China Sea, West Philippine Sea issues are all our sovereign rights. Now, but we never allowed the claim to Sabah to dominate or to dictate our relations with Malaysia. And so it has been said a few times, but as it turned out, it was only lip service, that the South China Sea issues is not the sum total of the relations between the Philippines and China, nor with the other claimants. That's correct. After all, if I may repeat what I earlier said, these maritime and territorial issues and maybe jurisdictional issues, there are so many in the world. In fact, the United States alone takes issue with so many issues with each and every country in the world. They have a 2-volume publication called Excessive Maritime Claims, and we're talking only about maritime claims. And the United States, this is 2 volumes by Captain Ashley Roach, writing for the State Department. So what does that show you? I mean, it is all over the world, and shall we let it define our bilateral relationship with each country, precisely relating it to what Sass said, Now, going to the practical part of it, yes, we did undertake negotiations with Malaysia. There were some progress, and I was lucky to be part of it, and later, in fact, as ambassador to Malaysia. And we looked at different models, not just rule of law or what is ours is ours. We looked at different models of resolving the disputes. Unfortunately, in a recent article that was written about what I said, it's factually correct. To use the term of Secretary Luxin, we dropped the ball, So it's still out there. Malaysia is, of course, very strong in protecting its interests. We have to be equally strong, but we do not have to look at it as what is ours and the rule of law. There can be, shall we say, other areas of cooperation, and in fact that could lead to a management of the dispute situation and eventually a resolution. Thank you.
Sir,
Can I
actually,
ask a question at this point? I'll be a questioner to Ambassador. Given that we have this dispute with Malaysia over Sabah, and very strong stories, and I think it's verified, it's not disputed at all by anybody. Malaysia had been a major financial and training backer for the rebels in Mindanao. And then we used them as the broker negotiator of the deal with Mindanao. How do you look at this from a diplomatic viewpoint?
Well, I'm not sure. Okay, I would just really ascribe that to changing policies of changing administrations. It was a different administration which had to settle. Let me mention the name, President Marcos, which had to address the issue of when Malaysia supported the rebellion in Mindanao and etc. etc. But under a different administration, especially under the administration of President Ramos, there was a very active search for cooperation in other areas. I mean, President Ramos did not say it this way, but essentially, to some extent, we set aside the sovereignty issue, but not the concern or the problem. We tried to work around the problem without insisting on a solution, on a rule of law solution in regard to the sovereignty issue. But even the rule of law was there. We wanted to take this to the International Court of Justice. Malaysia agreed, but again, change of administrations, change of focus, change of so many things. There was no consistent thread, to pursue this point. Thank you.
okay. Ambassador, there are some commentators on the Sabah issue saying that there was a referendum done under the auspices of the UN, and the Sabaweños voted to be, independent of or be part of Malaysia. If I remember correctly, their position. No, what's your statement on that?
In the first place, they don't call it a referendum. They called it, at least in Malaysia, but it does appear as referendum in the UN yearbook. In Malaysia, they just called it consultations, okay? But let's call it, let's not quibble about the terms. Let's call it referendum. But even as a technical term, as a referendum, it was flawed. Why? I handled this issue also when I was entry level, a very junior, entry level in the department. That's why I had to do some research on it. When the supposed actual referendum happened, and conducted, the Philippine panel was not allowed entry into Sabah to witness or observe the referendum. They were allowed in only 3 days after the referendum was finished and the results announced. So to me, that was a very flawed so-called referendum. But let me put it in another context, because I'm not, quite frankly, I'm not really sure whether I should reveal this. But in all these things, dirty tricks happen. When I became ambassador to Malaysia, and of course, and I visited Sabah a few times, talked to the people there, especially the Chinese businessmen. According to them, they were in a way pressured and threatened. Okay, I won't mention by who, but it's obvious that if they vote to join the Philippines, there will be bad consequences for them. That's a general statement, but I don't want to expound on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ambassador. Just to let you know, we really have very intelligent audience. They're asking if you can talk more about Benham Rice, about the Marine Ocean Research Project with Vietnam and China. Of course, we leave that for another time, no? Another question is, this is more from the media, no? Is Justice Carpio is lately vocal on WPS issues, saying a government protest to the UN might resolve the conflict. In your opinion, is this approach effective?
Can I answer?
Of course.
Can I answer that first? And then I will hand the mic to Ambassador Encomienda. I will give you some breathing space. First of all, the processes at the United Nations are governed by the UN Charter. Okay. UN Charter tayo mag-uumpisa. Ngayon, yung sinabi kasi ni Justice Carpio, meron siyang dalawang issue. First is yung Nicaragua versus United States ng 1986. Yung kanilang adjudication ay decided by the International Court of Justice. Yung Chagos naman ay advisory opinion ng International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice is the only UN-mandated court. And of course, if the tribunal is instituted under the directive of the UN Security Council, then therefore it's also a UN-mandated court. Ngayon, bakit nagkaroon ngayon ng recourse ang Nicaragua to go to the United Nations? One, it is because the International Court of Justice decisions can be referred to the UN Security Council. That is in the UN Charter. So, ganun ang ginawa ng Nicaragua because that is part of the process. Ngayon, wala naman nangyari doon eh. There's nothing that happened there. Nicaragua just filed, and of course, the UN General Assembly sided with Nicaragua, but that didn't resolve the conflict between Nicaragua and the United States. What the United States did was actually finance the election of Violeta Chamorro versus Ortega. So, ang kaso noon sa Nicaragua versus United States violated the sovereignty of Nicaragua. So the solution that the United States undertook was actually to violate again the sovereignty of Nicaragua by financing the campaign of Violeta Chamorro. And then, of course, nanalo si Chamorro. And then, that's the time na nagkaroon ng deal. The United States pressured the Chamorro government to actually repeal the law requiring Nicaragua to ask for reparations according to the International Court of Justice. Yung Chagos case naman na Justice Carpio was saying is a different issue again. The advisory opinion ng International Court of Justice was actually activated by the UN General Assembly resolution. Dahil sa UN Charter, the UN General Assembly can actually ask the International Court of Justice to issue advisory opinion. And of course, because it is the UN General Assembly who asked the ICJ to issue an advisory opinion, Mauritius can now ask the UN General Assembly to actually support the advisory opinion of the ICJ na inactivate ng UN General Assembly. Now, in the Philippines case, this is not a UN mandated court. This is a tribunal activated through UNCLOS, through the compulsory adjudication, and there's no recourse to this sa UN Charter. So, ang magiging ending nito, friends and Justice Carpio, the possible ending, if you raise this to the United Nations, the UN General Assembly will say na because this is a bilateral dispute, therefore, you must resolve this bilaterally. Kasi yan yung main contention ng UK and US and Australia sa Chagos case ng Mauritius. Sabi ng Australia, this is a bilateral dispute. Sabi din ng UK, this is a bilateral dispute. Sabi ng US na this is a bilateral dispute. They are in consonance with their vote against the UN General Assembly. Pero kasi, the Chagos issue kasi is linked to the issue of decolonization. Ngayon, nung earlier parts ng UN history, merong several UN resolutions calling for the decolonization ng mga bansa na of course were occupied by European powers and other Western powers. And kaya yung pagbabasahin yung UN General Assembly resolution here, they referred to the decolonization process para i-convince itong United Kingdom to leave Chagos and respect the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice and eventually by the International Tribunal on the Laws of the Sea. So dito makikita natin ang the way that Justice Carpio erroneously and misinterpreted and of course
Sass, nawala ka.
Interpreted and
Your
perceived.
last two lines, if you can.
Yeah, so dito sa vote in Nicaragua and the Chagos case, we can see Justice Carpio's erroneous misperception and misreading of history. Kaya importante ang history sa foreign policy eh. Kasi if we are not going to study the history of the course of actions that we are going to take, then we are bound to suggest useless foreign policy options. Now I'm going to hand the mic to Ambassador Encomiendo. Nakapag-ano na siya.
Want to add a few points or we'll move on to a lot more questions for you?
I suggest we move on.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Right. This is for any of the experts. No, Ambassador Encomienda, please take the first floor. But just a few of our audience comments. No. Thank you for this very enlightening and informative talk. We hope we can hear more. Especially with other topics that I mentioned earlier. And some of the audience that keep repeating their comments, can we invite Mr. Batong Bakal, Mr. Carpio, Mr. Del Rosario et al. Together with Ms. Sass, Mr. C, and Ambassador Encomienda for us to hear both sides once and for all. The spreading of fake news must be stopped and we should not allow those anti-government that are derailing our recovery and progress. How would you advise our Filipino friends and audience to help overcome this flood of fake or misleading or misinformation that is spreading in public? Ambassador, please.
Thank you. I would not really characterize any of the views that has been expressed in any narrative as fake or whatever. I would really just rather ascribe it to be the viewpoint of one person. And in regard to hearing both sides, naturally, that's the best way to go. But if you ask me whether I would come face to face with those personalities you mentioned, I would rather not, simply because, not for anything, not that I'm right or they are wrong, no. Their own narrative is quite different from mine. And I'm sorry to say that I'm not sure we can find any reconciliation. So I'd rather that let them express their own narrative. I will express my own narrative and let the audience judge. Thank you.
Mr. George or Sass?
I think the best has to be left for last, so I should allow Sass to have the last say. You know, I believe that there are actual fake facts being spread very extensively. The logic is sometimes very poor or not analogous or not consistent with how they present it. But this being a free country, we cannot stop anybody. So it's really part of the game of the decisions we do individually that will improve ourselves and the community, our families around us, or collectively, which is for the national good. And that also determines our destiny as a nation on why and how one country leapfrogs another and another one falls behind. So I think one of the steps to do is, if you find this session valuable, is maybe to help spread it with your friends, invite more to come, and maybe learn more. And whenever you get news, encourage friends, even those who believe otherwise, to examine the facts more carefully and invite them also to some of these sessions. And especially, of course, they can always read IDC, and most of all, kay yung mga blog ni Sass, no? Because it covers most of these issues as they come along. And that would be a big help, especially if we're talking about policymakers. So we thank also the audience, because so many of you have spent this afternoon with us.
Okay, I just like to inject, no, we have a lot of educators and researchers from the government and from the universities. For those who'd like to go more in depth, you are also welcome and invited to visit Ambassador Encomienda's NGO website, balikbalangay.com. I'll post it also on the comments, and academia.edu. Just search Ambassador Encomienda's name, no. Sass, your take? Sass, are you there?
Yes, I would like to build on what Ambassador Encomienda and George said earlier. Yes, I wouldn't characterize what they're saying as fake news, kasi fake news has become an ideological tool and a propaganda tool in order to actually defeat the argument of your opponent without actually addressing the argument of your opponent. And this has actually happened to me with Mr. J. Batong Bakal. Diba? Na ang haba-haba ng sinulat ko, ang sinabi lang niya is misleading, and then he attacked the argument by creating his own boogeyman. Right? This is he's created a version of an argument na wala doon sa original argument ko, and then made it appear na nanalo siya because of the argument that he created. Ngayon, yeah, tama. Let's have a battle of narratives. Let's have a battle of ideas. And in the end, this will be good for the Filipino people. Kasi makikita nila ngayon kung ano nga ba ang laman ng mga minumungkahing aksyon ng dalawang panig. Ano ba ang aksyon na magreresulta ng magandang relasyon ng mga bansa sa isa't isa? Ano bang aksyon ang maaayon para sa ating foreign policy to be achieved in a context ng isang stable international relations? I think, sabi nga ni George, let's end this on a good note. I would end this on a good note. No, I always believe that we have very good diplomats. Okay, I have studied the diplomatic history of the Philippines since pre-colonial times, kasi kailangan ko to sa thesis ko. Right? I have studied it. We have good diplomats in the Sultanate of Sulu. We have good diplomats noong panahon pa ng mga Botswanons. We have good diplomats noong panahon pa ng mga Mangyan. And they actually celebrate, they actually have a festival celebrating the relationship of China and Chinese and Mangyan people since time immemorial. We have good diplomats ng mga Ilocano kasi they have always maintained good trading relationship with China for hundreds of years. And going back to what Ambassador Encomienda said earlier, now we cannot reduce our relationship with a country based on a conflict that only happened several decades ago, and discounting the good relationship that we had with the country for thousands of years. This is actually throwing into the dustbin of history the tool that we can use in order to resolve our conflict with China, which is actually being done by the other party. They have erased history and only substituted it with the conflict that is actually happening now without even realizing the historical context of why this conflict happened in the first place. So dapat nating pag-aralan ng history. Dapat nating pag-aralan ng ating core Filipino values. Dapat nating pag-aralan ng ating kultura. How do we resolve conflict as a Filipino people? What kind of values do we have as Filipino people that we can use in order to persuade China or any other country in order for them to cooperate with us? What can we utilize from our culture in order to convince China na, you know, we are a people who would seek cooperation rather than conflict? Because if we cannot do that, and if we can only follow the current belligerent and suicidal type of nationalism based on victimhood complex na pinopromote ngayon ng maraming mainstream media, then I'm very sorry to say, but based on what I have studied on history, this will only lead to tragedy. And if we are going to continue following this belligerent tone, then we must prepare for a belligerent future. And as I've always said, you should enlist your children now to the army. And the children that should be first enlisted to the army and should be on the front lines are the children of Justice Carpio, the nephews and nieces and maybe children of J. Batong Bakal. Because at the end of the day, who would pay the price for the belligerent policies and hardline policies of these people? It is the ordinary Filipinos. So it is up for the ordinary Filipinos to challenge these people. Diba? Kasi we already paid an exorbitant amount for the arbitration case. And now they would like us to follow a very hardline policy in order to pursue something based on that arbitration case. And that would only mean paying more about this course of action. Now, we were not going to pay it with our money. We're going to be paying it with our own blood. That's all. Thank you.
Sass, we were supposed to end in a high note.
That's a high note.
Last 2 minutes from everybody. I'm getting a lot of education questions. No, we have university administrators, we have professors, we have researchers. 2 minutes each, and then we'll call it a night. No, and please stay tuned. Again, as Sass mentioned, this will be a first of a series of specialized topics. No, we'll go into more details. Tonight, our plan was more of a tapestry of issues and topics that are happening around us, no, especially in the news. So the question here is, as educators, how would you recommend or advise, whether as a education curriculum or as a resource where we can go, or how should our students be trained for this new world, no? Let's start with Ambassador Encomienda. 2 minutes, please.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's difficult to give a very, shall we say, coherent advice or design on that point, simply because of our local situation. I mean, we talk about independent foreign policy, which has to be based on a definition of national interest. I cannot see really where in our along our educational system can we find those in a coherent way. I would suggest that if we could, especially in this modern age of these Zoom meetings and virtual education, if we could get a group, I mean, I don't mean to get a group, form a group, but if a group comes about who are interested to pursue these issues, then we might be able to assign, topics for them to look at and help develop, not necessarily in the context of a diploma, or just because it's called diplomacy, not necessarily in the context of a diploma, but especially in terms of finding where we are, quite frankly, finding where we are and looking at improving our governance systems to have a rational direction, a coherent direction, and a clear direction. Thank you.
Sir, if I may inject, no, I believe that question is asking how can they train their students to be like you?
Well, they will have to live beyond 100 years because I came to this kind of awareness and everything
But
for 40 years. And
before your master's in London and Colombia, you were part of the Philippine education system.
no, from law school, in the first place, I took up law to better prepare for myself for, that's a good question, for a career in the foreign service. But the virtue of law there is in arriving at logical analysis and weighing of events. It is not the law itself. And my appreciation now, in fact, is if you go into international relations, the rule of law or international conventions are just guidelines. In the end, a country will follow where its national interests lie and has to pursue it. Rule of law, you follow it if you can follow it. If not, and the best state to observe along that line, believe it or not, is the United States.
Inspiring. Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. George, we'll save the best for last. Last high note, a high note.
Yes, we're the filler, but I would say I became very aware of how media is used to distort things. Very simply, in high school, from an American teacher who gave just two sessions on advertising and media and how the media can misinform people. Just 2 sessions. I think once it's implanted in your mind and you had a couple of exercises, it becomes part of your persona. It's like learning to swim. You never forget how to learn to swim or basic logic. So that's one. I think we can package little things like that. But the second thing to look at is today's learning is not like before. We can put it into the curriculum, or we can put them in short clips in social media and in YouTube, because this is how people learn now. We cannot give them a full course. They're not going to stay a full course. So we need to chop it into little bits. As they're interested and find it useful, they'll watch the next one. So we have to look at both technology and culture. No? So if we package this as logic, we cannot package it as a lesson. That will be interesting for maybe the top 10, 20% of the population. But if we package it and sell it, this is what you can avoid this problem, and this is what you can achieve more of if you watch this, if you happen this. And I learn a lot more about this fake news, and also by experience, because being in business, it's not a theoretical discussion. I kept getting cheated so many times. I learned to realize, after a while, every time you fail, whether because someone cheated you or because you believe something you shouldn't, you become a little smarter. So you pay the tuition fee for the lesson. And if they watch the YouTube or whatever, and they watch Sass and they read Sass and they read Ambassador Encomienda and listen to this, they will be a little smarter. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. In a way, you're saying this is one of our first dose. We're getting vaccinated from the virus.
Yes, we should vaccinate people. Even in short takes, they should be vaccinated. Yeah.
Yes. Sass?
Ano na raw, high note na raw.
High note.
Okay.
How do we go?
I promise that this will be on a high note. Okay. Kasi the narrative right now in the media is either you are with Carpio et al. Or you are against them. And if you are against them, you are immediately tagged as pro-China. but we are not being pro-China here, right? We are not being pro. We are being pro the Philippines, and being pro the Philippines is understanding our position based on our, again, based on our history, values, and culture. Ito kasing narrative na you against them, this is actually against the core Filipino value called kapwa. You know kapwa, di ba? We take this for granted. What does kapwa means? Kapwa means seeing the other in yourself. Diba? It means na you would like to take the perspective and understand the position of the other person. And you do that because you consider the other person like yourself. So there is a degree, a high degree of respect in our culture for understanding another person's perspective. And I feel na if we can just reunite with our kapwa mentality, then perhaps we would be able to craft a foreign policy direction that is more in line with our values, culture, and history, and more importantly, to our interests as a Filipino and not simply as a little brother, the little brown brother of the United States of America. So, on that note, yeah, relearn our history, relearn our values, relearn our culture, and embrace what makes us truly Filipino.
High note. Very good. That's all for tonight. Thanks everyone for staying. Sass, last words for your audience and fans as well.
Ano yun? I'm sorry.
Any last words for your many of your fans and followers are watching?
Maraming salamat sa sumubaybay sa amin sa panel discussion na ito, and maganda nagkakaroon tayo ng ganito kasi noong nakaraang administrasyon we don't have anything like this, right? It was a very, very different climate, and now we should take advantage of this opportunity to learn, right, about how we should be able to manage conflicts more productively. Tama ba yung, di ba, wala namang masamang maging self-critical right? Even the United States, they encourage self-criticisms in their own foreign policy. So we should encourage this. We should encourage more perspectives to be out there in the open. And lahat naman tayo magbe-benefit if we have a battle of ideas and narratives, diba? Na hindi lang yung kabila ang parating binibigyan ng espasyo ng mainstream media, and that's why it's very important that we have this platform through Facebook, 'di ba? Na nadidiscuss natin itong mga issues na ito. Otherwise, mangyayari na naman uli yung nangyari nung nakaraang administrasyon na hindi natin pinag-isipang mabuti ang ating aksyon dahil nga sorry to say, this was purely motivated to be diplomatic about it. By their ego, di ba? Yan na yung pinaka-diplomatic ko masasabi tungkol sa kanilang action. Pero maraming salamat, and this will not be the last discussion we would be having about foreign policy and our and other issues related to our disputes with China and other geopolitical issues. Patikim pa lang po ito. At maraming salamat sa IDSI or EDC Center for hosting this panel discussion, and hopefully we can invite Justice Carpio and Batong Bakal to join us here, right? Mas maganda na magtapatan and then magkaroon ng batuhan ng ideas, and that we can question each other's ideas in front of the Filipino people.
Right. Pro-Philippines, pro-peace, and pro-humanity. Ambassador Encomienda, if Tina is beside you, she probably sees many of the comments. Many thanks for your generous sharing and for your insight. 40 years of dedication and contribution to the country, and we are better for it. Thank you for your generous sharing, Ambassador Encomienda, Mr. George, and of course, Sass, Sassy, Sasot, Rogando. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. And have a good evening.
Thanks, George.
Still 350. Sass, yung galing. Very
Time
intelligent.
for the dance number.
Yes, Sass, dance or sing.
Ano pa, tuloy pa ba tayo? Tuloy pa ba
Actually,
tayo?
when we convert it to a meeting, yeah, 200 plus. I think they want to stay longer.
So maybe you can just disengage it from Facebook.
Right. Okay, you're right.
So